I woke up this morning with a multi-million-dollar idea, and I've got a friend at Hasbro, so don't steal this because I'm going to pitch it. It's called Tennis the Board Game. Here's the commercial. Guy pulls up. He's the spokesman. Friend is in his gym clothes. Guy gets out of the car, not in his gym clothes. So the friend says, "What are you doing? I thought we were playing tennis." And the spokesman says, "We are." Holds up the game. Tennis, the board game. Friend says, "It's Scrabble." It could be any game. That's the beauty of it. You take the board game, you put it halfway under the net. You find an occupied tennis court halfway under the net, one player on one side of the net, the other player on the other side of the net. And the object is to finish and win the game without getting hurt. How would you get hurt? Well, because you're playing in the middle of somebody else's tennis match. So you might get hit with the ball or the players if they're angry with you. These are the jokes. How is everybody? We're going to finish our Each Sold Separately demo, which took me 2 hours to record. So I'm going to edit it down as quickly as I can, and I will show you how to complete your painting. Darkwing Duck. To begin this process, you're going to think in terms of the abstract painting technique, vertical attachment. And what that is essentially you begin with a color on your brush, place it at the top, and then distribute it down through the figure to the bottom. I'm beginning with purple as my color because the character wears a purple mask and a purple jacket, so it's easier to distribute. Obviously, you're not going to be distributing the colors that you select in the same way that you did during your underpainting. I'm trying to work more with like what the color of the clothing is. In doing this, you're going to work with a technique that's called Scumbling. Scumbling is essentially a dry brush technique where you almost think in terms of chalk scratching over the pavement. I'm using a fairly large brush here. It's a 1/2 inch, and all throughout this painting, that's the only brush that I'm going to use on the figure. Really thinking in terms of carving out planes and using the flat, straight edge to establish any type of detail or clarity. With the Scumbling, you want to be able to pick up the lower layers. Part of this is going to be beneficial in oil because that way it's going to prohibit you from building up too much of a surface that then you work against. You know that the oil paint has a slow drying process, so you want to work with your lower layers. So that underpainting ends up permeating through and influencing the color choices that you make. So right now we're bringing the painting from a monochromatic up to something that has some color, and the purple is starting to make a difference here. Eventually, when we start introducing orange, that's going to make an enormous difference. In looking back at the black and white photo, you want to keep track of your tones. So how light or how dark is an area, that's what you want to kind of bring into the influence of your color. And you notice the color that I was using a moment ago introduced more reds. It's not just adding white to your color to make it lighter, because that will transform everything into a pastel. Think about the ingredients of the color that you're mixing. If you are using a secondary color, in this case purple, there are two main ingredients, a blue and a red. Now the red is the lighter of the two colors and the warmer of the two, so after I've added white to my color, I can go back in with a red to warm it up and give it a little bit more saturation and pop. Now in some cases that could end up sending it towards pink, so in the case of this painting, I used the different blues that I had on the palette to my advantage, hopefully, to try to send the color more in the purple range. The key is using a variety of color. And really trying to resist the urge to cake the paint on. What I noticed throughout this process, very rarely did I ever move with the paint brush kind of side to side. It was always placing and pulling, and almost even like a sewing machine with the needle jabbing into the fabric and then retracting. I don't usually paint like that, to be honest with you, but it was something that I attempted consciously and also unconsciously. Once I realized I was doing it, I really tried to keep with it so that I would have stylistic consistency. And right here I'm beginning to establish the orange, and for me this is when the painting came to life. Essentially this is cadmium yellow and burnt sienna as a blend with a little bit of deep cadmium red, and this ended up kind of establishing like an ambient lighting on the beak and on the foot. I find it with oil helpful to establish darks and then build up to lights. So you see that in most cases, I'm beginning with a darker color and gradually introducing light. Here's some cadmium yellow pale that I'm introducing to the beak to sit on top of the darker mid-tone that I previously established, and then going in with white to further lighten that cadmium yellow pale that I was just using. And for me, those highlights are able to attach themselves better to the surrounding area if they're placed upon darks. The trick is to not go overboard. I think that there are more successful moments within the beak than there are in the jacket here. I think the jacket goes too quickly towards white in some sections. Now granted, this is plastic, so it's more highly reflective, but I think that the jacket needed more work. If you look at the beak, there is a stronger sense of lighting, sculpture, and restraint as far as contrast and lighting goes. The lighting is effective though, so it's almost as though as long as you're using the same brush, and I never really once cleaned this during the process, your brush is influenced by or your paint is influenced by the colors that are already on your brush and already on your painting. So when I say that I don't clean it, I did pull the paint off with a paper towel, but I didn't dip it into the water. So it was impossible to actually get a pure white, and I think to the painting's benefit, because the lights are always tinged with, or tinted with some color. And it's interesting too that underpainting and the variation of dark that I'm searching for within the beak and on the back of the foot, it brings those darker, otherwise inactive areas to life much more. And depending on my class schedule and how the timing on the demo was going, I did consider only painting the jacket and the beak for this demo and just leaving the white of the feathers as is, but I felt that it would give an improper illusion for what the painting is. The toy itself has white feathers, pure white as the manufacturer could get the paint, but even the white is the white areas of your toy, because of the lighting, they're influenced by the temperature of the lighting. So I'm really using the same colors that I've been using for the jacket and the beak. There are oranges and there are purples in terms of influence on the white. It's just a matter of seeking out cool grays and warm grays. So there are moments within these feathers that lean towards warmth, and then moments that lean towards cool. Around the eye, it got more challenging to keep my detail and my shape with such a large brush, but that was part of the challenge. How can I turn the brush to capture form? And there were various points, like I would move on to the hand, for example, here, knowing that the eyelid and the iris or the pupil had gotten away from me in terms of form, but I knew that in jumping around and working on the figure as a whole simultaneously, it was going to present better unity. And here, moving on to the hat, which has been... Here, moving on to the hat, which at that point had been sorely underdeveloped and not attended to, and that's really going to bring it together. Here, going back to the eye a little bit and deepening some shadow. This was a huge mistake. I very much regretted pulling the coloring from the hat into the cheek there, and for the sake of distribution, had to bring it down to the leg. And now here you see me trying to course correct. Rather than putting the paper towel on there or a palette knife and trying to dig the paint back off, it's kind of like you reset. You reapply the darks and then build your highlights gradually again. But you've got to be careful, because when you're scumbling, you want to limit the amount of paint you're putting on there, because as it gets caked on, it'll be much more difficult to reclaim the color. And you also don't want a visual inconsistency with the thickness of the paint. It might even catch the light differently. It might have a different texture. So that's something to be aware of. The scumbling process, I think, is even more forgiving or freeing of a process, because if you're painting at full opacity and thickness at all times, it's almost as if you're wasting your time with an underpainting. So the reason to do an underpainting is to gradually build your painting. Think of this more in terms of watercolor, where you start to work in smaller and smaller areas, and your main part is the large underpainting. So here now I've switched to a 1-inch brush. I think it's 1 inch, it might be 3/4, and I've mixed a lighter variant of my background, which was done in acrylic. Here now using oil, and I've got a darker version up top to try to punch out or deepen my background, set it back further, and pop the character, just as on the bottom with highlights, trying to ground the figure and push his foot forward. This became a challenge in terms of moving around the silhouette of the figure with such a large brush. Eventually I do switch back to the 1/2-inch brush right now to try to maneuver around the edge of the figure a little bit more. This was helpful in terms of correcting a couple drawing issues, like the beak, the top of the beak, the bill, had protruded forward a little bit too much. But by and large, I didn't worry too much about correcting those issues. And here you see me repairing the panel a little bit that had been damaged in the first demo.
If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me via email. And in the meantime, please continue to practice social distancing, wash your hands, and wear a mask.